Well, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this special series from ecancer on Ukraine conflict and cancer. My name is Richard Sullivan from King's College London, and I'm also the chairman of the ecancer trustees. And it's a great pleasure to welcome back to ecancer to give us an update on the state of radiotherapy in Ukraine. Three very distinguished individuals. And Dr. Ruslan Zelinsky, who is president of the Ukrainian Association of Medical Physicists, who has been doing some extraordinary work in Ukraine, and we'll be hearing a little bit more from him at the moment. And of course, Darian Laird and Professor Pat Price from the Global Coalition for Radiotherapy have been doing so much to support colleagues, not just in Ukraine, but also in neighboring countries. And we'll be hearing a little bit from them in a moment about what the key challenges have been over the last 6 months and looking forward to the future. Ruslan, maybe I can start with you. The last time we talked was May. We're now 12 months on from the brutal invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Tell us a little bit about what's been the biggest impact over the last 6 months on the state of radiation therapy since our last interview in May.
I think the most difficult period for radiotherapy in Ukraine was in the first months of full-scale invasion. And if speaking of the period after May, in my opinion, there were two things that had an impact on radiotherapy services in Ukraine. The first, I think, is more local. This is a liberation of part of Ukrainian territories. For example, in September, the Kharkiv region was liberated, and this is allowed to radiotherapy centers to work in more safer conditions. Also, in November, the city of Kherson was liberated, where one Cobalt-60 machines and one Linac allocated. Our colleagues were under occupation for about 8 months. And now, despite the constant shelling of this city, they are happy, of course, that they were released from the occupation. The second thing which had impact to radiotherapy is more global. This is terroristic attacks on critical infrastructure of Ukraine, especially power station. Attacks started in September 2022. There have already been 17 attacks. The last one, unfortunately, yesterday. Of course, many radiotherapy centers were forced to temporarily stop radiotherapy due to lack of electricity, but not all centers, because some centers had electrical generators. I also want to point out that this problem with electricity didn't become critical for a very long time. Because for patients, especially thanks to heroism of the repair services in Ukraine, as well as a quick purchase of a lot of electrical generators. And now I think most of Ukraine centers have generators, and any attacks not a critical for us.
No, that's extremely useful to know, because I think, we've been talking a lot about the impact of the power outages, and you say the attacks against the critical infrastructure. I guess maybe the next follow-on question from that is obviously the human capacity as well, the ability to deliver radiotherapy in terms of the resourcing. And maybe give us an idea of what you've seen in terms of changes to patient flows to radiotherapy centers, and also from medical physics sides, from radiation oncology, the sort of capacity challenges that you've been experiencing.
At the beginning on 2023, Larissa Stadnik, this is from Kharkiv Institute of Radiology, who is coordinator of DIRECT database in Ukraine, sent some questionnaires to radiotherapy centers in Ukraine. Unfortunately, we received response only from 63% of the centers. In some reasons, I don't know, but in general, the situation, I think, is clear. In 2022, the number of radiation oncologists decreased by 7.8%. Medical physicists by 7.3%, and radiation therapists by 10%. It's compared to 2021. And of course, probably some of them went abroad, but I think not all, of course. The other part may work in centers that have not yet filled out the questionnaires, but at the moment we don't know. As for patient, as for patient, we have more complete data. The number of patients who received external beam radiotherapy in 2022 is about 34,000 people. This is 11% or 4,000 patients less than in 2021. Of course, I would like to think that they all went abroad and received treatment, but I am realist and clearly understand that only part of these people went abroad, and the other patients, I don't know, probably remained in the occupation territories. Some were not diagnosed, of course, or maybe some were killed, of course. And for me, it would be interesting to know how many patients from Ukraine received radiotherapy in other countries. And I think in this way, we can determine how many didn't receive help at all. But I don't know if such information is available from these countries, but this is really interesting information for us.
I think you've highlighted a really important point about the combined intelligence to understand the patient flows, and maybe we can touch on that with both Darren and Pat in a moment. Maybe my final question for you, Ruslan, at the moment is, do you think development is possible at these times? Obviously, we're still in the middle of a major war here, yet we need to keep on top of radiotherapy, continued training, development of equipment, etc. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we understand that the cancer rates are increased in post-war countries. This is statistics, unfortunately. And of course, we do our best for develop despite the difficult times. For example, during 2022, 3 new Linux was installed, and about 14 more are planned to be installed in nearest future. Also, the Minister of Health plans to purchase a large number of linear accelerators. And we really need this equipment. Also, we understand that someone must work on this equipment, and our Help Ukraine group organized some trainings for radiation oncologists and medical physicists in USA and in Australia also, and also some training we organized in Ukraine for medical physicists and radiation oncologists.
Fantastic. And maybe I can pass over to Darren and to Pat now to give us a sense from the GCR perspective of where you've seen the last 6 months, and also maybe where you see the future and what are the critical issues from your perspective.
I suppose if I speak from the clinical point of view, I think in the international radiotherapy community, we're just all completely in awe of how Ukraine has actually coped with their radiotherapy, because in terms of the treating physicians and medical physicists, that treating under that amount of stress, actually not just stress in general, but being under attack and being under occupation, and then with your infrastructure attacked, how you've kept going is just amazing and is a real testament to that commitment to the patients. And I see such resilience there. And also for the subject area, resilience in radiotherapy, there has been some spots of radiotherapy where people know they can come for good cancer care, and how useful radiotherapy is when everything else is falling apart. And I think also the patients appears to have shown great resilience as well, because as you say, unfortunately, some of them now will be denied a diagnosis and cancer care because of their situation. And I know the extreme lengths some patients have had to go and live in the hospital if they can't get taxis, it's unsafe to travel. It's just unbelievable what they've had to go through. I know Darren will share with some interviews, but we hear of somebody having their radical treatment for lung cancer and then going straight back to the front. it's just it's humbling, and I think it's very difficult for us to realize just what is going on and how awful that is. And I suppose that has inspired us in the Global Coalition to create this international task force. It's got 122 active members from all over the world and all different levels of expertise to help with radiotherapy, for translation, from legal bits to supplies to interaction, and also a lovely company, private-public partnership, the machine manufacturers. And I think there's just this sense of wanting to help. And our role, I think, so far has been to partly to get information out for the Ukrainian radiotherapists, so to give that to the people that need to know and can help, and also then hopefully to put something back in terms of what is needed, and then work with you to really keep it in the eye so that it's not forgotten, and then to work with you on how can we help move you forward when you need to rebuild. And there is obviously a big rebuild to do there. So I would just say Ruslan, just amazing job, and it's been such a privilege working with you. So perhaps Darian, I could talk to you about what we've been doing in the GCR and what we plans for the future.
Please, yes, and well said, absolutely. Please, Darian.
I just will echo Pat and also add that the international community that has come together has really found so much dedication and, time to focus on Ukraine, which has been really incredible. I think, like you were talking about, that data collection has really been a huge part of GCR and what we're doing to make sure that we're gathering the information that's needed on the inside and on the outside in the neighboring countries. I think, Ruslan, you brought up a very excellent point. It's very important that we know what patients are slipping through the cracks. What clinicians, what people on the ground are not getting the training and the education they need. And I think that's where we see the next 6 months, where it's really important that we have that data and that information so we can rebuild with patients at the focus, and then also the education and the training and the infrastructure to rebuild as well. That's kind of our goal for the next 6 months, is to continue to collect that data that has been so important with our network. I mean, as you mentioned, Ruslan, the network with the Help Ukraine group, those working in Romania, the doctors that we've been in touch with in Poland, as well as around the world who are contributing, from radiation oncologists in Astro who are supporting in the UK with Amethyst UK. There's just so many that have come to support and help and provide that data, which is important. But now it's time for us to kind of create that centralized information hub and share the data a little bit more seamlessly. And so that we can also encourage, that's one thing that the GCR does very well. And we've had a lot of experience with, as well with Pat and Radiotherapy UK, with advocacy. It's time for us to bring that information to ministries of health and say, yes, radiotherapy is this life-saving cancer treatment that needs to be rebuilt within Ukraine. It's incredible that during the war, Linux have been installed. I mean, that's just a huge endeavor. And, thanks to so many working inside the country, and as well as Pat mentioned, our industry stakeholders, but more needs to be done. And so if we can collect that data and that information and continue to gather it, create that centralized information hub, then we know that we can express to the governments in Eastern Europe, and maybe even set up a model for future humanitarian crises, right? As Pat mentioned, it's just been incredible what Ukraine has done, what they've been able to manage, and let's take that and make sure that that is not lost.
That's marvelous. And I guess, Ruslan, I'd like to leave the last word to you, if I may. I guess I want to get a sense really here that if you're speaking to policymakers, the European Union, the negotiations now with the World Bank for reconstruction funding, what are the sort of one or two absolute top line messages you would like to get across to them regarding radiotherapy in Ukraine?
Of course, in my opinion, the main issues in the future very much depend on how the war will continue. Yeah. If the situations will be like now, the main issues will be related with moving from Cobalt-60 to Linux machine. Like Linux installation, commissioning, and of course, staff training. As I mentioned before, we don't have a lot of medical physicists, for example, and we really need to train it, because a lot of equipment, and at the moment, some experienced physicists moving all around the country to different centers and help the centers to install, to commissioning, and to train staff inside country. Yeah? But of course, help of international community will be very useful for us. Also, of course, we need some maybe equipment, maybe some dosimetry equipment, for example, for audit of the centers, because new staff, new person, young medical physicist, and of course, under stress, they can make some errors, yeah, and it will be good to have some equipment which we can take and go into these centers and check the dosimetry practice, for example, and so on. Of course, I think we can do our best for our patient. We don't know what will be tomorrow. Yeah, for example, rockets periodically fly over our nuclear power plants. And yesterday, one of the nuclear power plants was without power supply due to attack on critical infrastructure. And anything can happen, of course. And the Ukrainian try not to plan for the future, unfortunately, but we try to do our best today. And I hope you will help us. And of course, thank you for your great support.
Ruslan, you're doing more than your best. As Pat said, what you're doing is nothing short of heroic and extraordinary. And I think we all just want to recognize the immense bravery and dedication to your patients. And I think it speaks on behalf of everyone here from ecancer and the GCR saying that we're, 110% behind you. And just to thank you, Ruslan, Darian, Pat, for all your work and your advocacy, and for delivering all the care to the Ukrainian patients. Thank you again for talking to ecancer today. It's been an extraordinary discussion, and we look forward to continuing this discussion and hopefully a resolution to the conflict very, very soon. Thank you all very much.